Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Value Stream Show. I'm joined by my co host, Andrew Davis. And today we're going to be recapping a couple of events from last week. We both attended FlowTopia and DevOps Enterprise Summit. Um, Andrew, what was your experience of FlowTopia? That's a year one, brand new conference about value streams. How did it go?
Yeah, so FlowTopia was, I think, wisely piggybacked on DevOps Enterprise Summit, sort of symbiotic relationship in Las Vegas just the day before. So the theory is everybody just flies in an extra day early. The tickets were inexpensive. I was happy to. I was happy to see folks. Honestly, my experience was it was just nice to see what a year one conference looks like. And I've never been involved in creating a conference, but to think that I'm sure there was an enormous amount of work, but obviously it was vastly simpler than some of these big full on conferences. I thought it was just very encouraging for me that you can bootstrap these kinds of things, and happy to see Helen creating that community, creating that space. I think the subsequent years will always grow and take more shape. But it was good for sharing information. There was this a few initiatives that I know you wanted to talk about, the assessment and the value stream management interoperability committee getting started. And so there's some of these things where you've announced them, but there's nothing like getting everybody in the same room and then explaining it and telling everybody again. And um, so, there were some rich conversations, I thought, especially near the end, and you guys did a good job. What do you think?
Well, it was honestly something I was a little skeptical of putting together because I find, I have got about a decade of conference organizing experience, and it takes a long time to build up momentum. And the VSMC is very new, so I was initially cautious because I think that in order to really reach enough people to bring, you think of it as a funnel thing, right? You've got lots of people that you could reach out to, and a small segment of that is going to respond, and then a small segment of that is going to be interested, and then a smaller segment is available, and you go down and down and down, and you've got this small group of people who's actually going to be able to show up. And so I was mostly concerned with growing the top of that funnel as much as possible. But I think that uh, we were definitely able to capitalize on the the fact that Does was happening and folks might be in town anyways. So that was, and a lot of folks told us that that was what worked well. So I was very happy that we made that decision to piggyback. But Helen really did the bulk of the work. It was really remarkable what she was able to put together, and also that she, I think, managed the scope well. Like, it was not overly ambitious, which I think is great. It was very much a focus on getting people in the same room for as much time as possible to have those conversations. Um,
And you had about
so
100 people there, so I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, whatever your aspirations were, 100 people is a solid crew to have as a year one conference. There were plenty of, you know, people were attentive for the main, and you had a number of, very knowledgeable, excellent speakers. Gary Rupp, in particular, doing a pretty detailed, precise analysis of some of the points in his book, and I was grateful to get that. So.
yeah, we had Gary, we had Brian Finster, who
Right.
a lot of folks in the DevOps community know, a lot of folks in the Value Stream community also know, and then kind of some practical experience reports like Sejal and Eva were talking about kind of like real life applications. And I think that one of the main takeaways from the event, from the organizing side, is trying to really lean into stories for next year and try to collect these compelling experience reports, because I think that's what people really want to hear. It's like, tell me something that I can relate to, and show me what this looks like from different angles. So that's where I'm really excited about next year, having a larger audience for awareness, and maybe the conference stays the same size. I think the size was fantastic. One of the things that's challenging about when you have thousands of people, or even 1,000 people, which is kind of your typical conference size in a specific domain, you don't collide with the same people for the same amount of time or the same frequency. But when it's small, you're bumping into the same people, and you can start a conversation, continue it, go talk to someone else, and then bring what you've heard and learned to these conversation threads that kind of maintain. But yeah, so I'm very hopeful and excited about next year. And I know how these things go. They kind of grow exponentially and quicker than you'd expect. So I'm excited about that.
In terms of experience reports, I know, getting a little ahead of ourselves because we're going to talk about DOS more later, but just reflecting on some of the talks that made the biggest impact on me at DOS, it was people just talking about how rough things were and how, their hypothesis was they didn't want to just tell people what to do. And they found if they didn't just weren't a little bit autocratic about some of these initiatives, it didn't work, or they had various theories and this didn't work and that didn't work. And that actually one of the most encouraging aspects of Doves for me is, the perseverance that comes out in these real life experience reports, and to do the same with a narrower focus on value stream management, I think would be powerful.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to kind of put that a different way, one of the things, if folks haven't been to DOES, one of the things that you often hear is, we're on year X of an X year journey, or a year X of a Y year journey, and X is 3 years, and Y is like 5 to 10 years, and they have these long time horizons. And those are the companies that I think are succeeding, because they kind of they don't expect quick returns. They don't expect an overnight success. And that's a good lesson to bring into the value stream spaces. We're kind of in the early stages of where DevOps was many years ago. So one of the things I wanted to bring up and then get your perspective on was kind of my takeaways in this. What I got from FlowTopia was primarily, it was this opportunity for a lot of folks in the space to get on the same page about where should we be focusing our energy, because we really feel like there's a lot of ground to cover, and if we're if we're on the same path together or focused in the same direction, we'll probably accomplish more. So we had this focus on like, who's the audience for value streams, and it brought us to this conversation about it's folks kind of bridging the gap between product and engineering, or business and tech. But business and tech being broad, we kind of agreed to focus on product leaders and engineering leaders as, more specific personas or more specific individuals, where we could go and have a conversation directly with someone in product leadership about, what do you think about this? How do you think about flow? How do you think about the end-to-end production and delivery of value? And that kind of brought me to the next takeaway, which was not talking about value streams all the time, right? Really just talking about what it is without using the specific words in every conversation. So if we're going to be reaching out beyond, if you're in engineering, reaching out to product, or if you're in product and you're reaching out to engineering, being very conscious of the language and the audience of the conversation. So I found that really kind of a powerful reminder from outside the bubble of how you communicate to beyond the bubble. Well, I don't know if that was something that you were picking up on or was on your radar at all, but it was something that I really walked away with.
Yeah, you have a you have a very different lens because you've been part of the organizing committee for that and part of the board for the VSMC. So I didn't have that perspective of strategy for how to communicate. What you say makes sense, though. Of course, we tend to people latch onto a buzzword and then just try to use the buzzword a lot. And like they do things like creating podcast called the Value Stream Show and these kinds of things. But the point is, if you've really internalized the meaning, then you can then it's appearing in all kinds of ways and all kinds of formats, and you can adopt somebody else's terminology for it. If there's terminology that's already present in your organization, but the idea, but that similar themes emerge, of identifying, looking at the end-to-end process and handoffs and waiting time and gaps and these kinds of things being, the fruitful parts of a process to work on optimizing. So, yeah. So for me, partly it was just getting eyes on a lot of the organizing committee. Like there was a panel discussion with a lot of the members of the VSMC board, the VSMC being the Value Stream Management Consortium board, of which Steve's a member. But it was good to know who some of those people were. They were generally they were representatives of the products, a lot of the commercial products in that space. So I was, just appreciative of getting better connected with those folks.
Yeah, I had a couple of really good conversations that I think were facilitated by the fact that we were in the same room, and we don't often have one-to-one conversations with a lot of the board members on the vendor side. And there was a couple of conversations where folks are very open and honest about the fact that we really don't know a lot about this yet, and we don't know how to pitch it. We don't know what the appetite is, or do folks really get it? How do we get them to understand? And so it was great to have conversations where folks were a little bit more transparent about the challenges in the space, and I had really rewarding conversations where it was just like, why this? Is this really something that we should be focusing energy on, and reconciling different perspectives on? Okay, well, I think this messaging resonates, and what do you think about this aspect of it? And because each of those vendors, they have different perspectives on how they frame the space and their product and what problems it solves, and who's it for. And so I find it really rewarding but challenging to kind of bring everybody under the same umbrella of like, okay, we all want to improve the flow of work and the delivery of value in organizations. So how do we come together to do that in our own unique ways, speak the same language and speak the language of other people who are outside the space? And so it was a really great opportunity to do all that reconciliation. And then there was a couple of other things, like just surprising conversations. Like I bumped into a couple of folks who just found out about it at the last minute, showed up. Like there was this consulting firm called DXC that were talking about how they're realigning their organization towards value and along value streams. And the two gentlemen who showed up from that organization, there was kind of like a a believer and a skeptic, and so we were having conversations about what they're grappling with, how it's helping them, but they're also struggling with alignment and teaching people about this way to structure the business around value streams. So I'm going to be working with them on kind of telling their story, because I think that's one of the cases that is really remarkable at this stage, to see a company almost entirely reorganize around value streams, and have a positive experience of doing that.
One of the things they should probably look at early on is branding. I had to just double check and remind myself that DXC was in fact HP Enterprise before they spun off that consulting group. So it's a $16 billion company, quite massive, but just haven't gotten the brand recognition there yet.
Yeah. It was surprising to talk to them and hear that they had all this, massive staff count, and this actually they're kind of a services business, they're a consulting business, so they're not necessarily building products, but they saw the value in kind of, they were talking about not value streams, but what the value stream represented, which I found was very valuable. They talked about hire to retire, right? So this idea of like, what is the flow of bringing on a new talent to the organization, and how to develop that talent and get them to a point where they're contributing maximum value. And then managing, the other half of that is sort of like a customer journey from the talent perspective, but the development of that talent is kind of like a development value stream in a traditional sense. And that was one of the things that they were talking about. Then they were also talking about, I think, quote to cash, right? A classic kind of sales flow. And, just reminding those of us who are in the bubble that you're not always using the word value stream, but you're almost always talking about a flow of work and the delivery of value.
Right. Nice. And yeah, fantastic. Nice and that's kind of a bridge, yet another bridge between this IT focused community and these broader groups who are also trying to look at the end-to-end flow. So should we talk about does?
I think we probably should. Yeah. We don't want to stay on this too long, but we can definitely link to, there's all the talks from FlowTopia were recorded. There's a lot of material that's going up on the site, so we can link to that. But yeah, it does. What were your highlights?
First of all, for anybody who's not down with the lingo, that's the DevOps Enterprise Summit, which is the conference that IT Revolution puts on. So IT Revolution has spawned an enormous, it's basically been a gathering point for an enormous amount of the most innovative thought in IT, I would boldly say, certainly in DevOps. Highlights from DOS, obviously, we've not had a conference since 2019 in person, right? So that's 3 years. And it was, this is my third in-person DevOps Enterprise Summit, and have attended most of the virtual ones in between those times. But it was just great to see people. And at this point, having spent a bit of time in that community, I now knew a reasonable number of folks at the conference. So it was nice to meet people in person for the first time. A lot of this is the, getting back together in person experience, and really speaking to the richness of that, on the, on an emotional level, and the potential for rich conversations and serendipity and so forth. That's sometimes hard to recreate in the digital environment. And just yet again, such a fantastic lineup of speakers and thinkers and attendees, that the breadth the diversity of speakers. An increasing number of people from the military, including Admiral Richardson, retired four-star admiral, a lot of other, high-ranking officials talking about their challenges, trying to bring about what we'd call digital transformation. You can't see my air quotes if you're if you're listening to the podcast, but getting teams to move more quickly and be more agile in a digital world. The monumental challenge that presents inside, any large organization, but especially something like the federal government, where there are there was a just where there's so many rules put in place for better or worse reasons, so many people involved in the process, the challenge of effecting change. I felt very strongly ashamed about how much whining I've done about the challenge of getting things done in my small startup. Hearing these stories from people, where their organization is constrained by acts of Congress, that if they really want to get things done, they've got to move a bill through Congress. So it's
Right.
like, now that is serious organizational change management. There's and so just the variety of stories they brought. A lot of them highlighted the challenges and the setbacks and the amount of and the persistence that was required to effect change, as well, the skillfulness. And so I took a lot of encouragement from the conference, as well as specific inspiration from different folks.
It's strange to be confronted with so much military presence in DevOps Enterprise Summit, but I actually I've come to appreciate it a lot, because it's, as you mentioned, you have this immovable object of Congress on one side, and you also have kind of the whims of the executive leadership, who can just pass mandates that need to be adhered to immediately or in extremely limited time horizons. And the fact that, it's, as a military, you really have very little opportunity to entrench yourself, right? I mean, it's not like you can lobby for regulation that protects your business and keeps competition away. You really have to work at that, and it's a very real challenge. So I find that very interesting, and I have very good conversations with folks who are working very, very hard, with a very strong sense of duty as well, and just being floating in and out of conversations. There's, you have this ecosystem where you have kind of military officers talking to contractors, folks who are not really part of that machine, and they're kind of interacting with it from the outside, sharing the same goals and the same challenges. So it's an interesting dynamic that's kind of unique to DevOps Enterprise Summit, that has certainly grown over the years, because I think that they get a ton of value out of this. I'm not sure how many other opportunities they get to have those kinds of conversations with the rest of the public industry and other large organizations that have different dynamics. So it's very unique in that way.
Yeah, I mean, the you hinted at it being kind of strange to be having an increasing military representation in a lot of these IT revolution events, and it's I guess, if I were to frame it, one of my hesitation about obviously this is a very value oriented or biased statement, but there's an enormous amount of value destruction in the military. I mean, that's fundamentally what you're doing. You're building things and blowing them up, and not not to mention destroying other people's cultures, countries, environmental destruction, so forth. That's done in the course of trying to execute. At the same time, they're phenomenal organizations, right? And the leadership skills that are cultivated, the ability to be effective, and so forth. And so it definitely creates some of these ethical quandaries where and I felt that ethical quandary in a broader sense, like, the organizations present at DevOps Enterprise Summit, they're representing, some of the world's biggest companies, and their whole focus is driving consumer behavior, right? And so as we try to make value streams more efficient, IT operations more efficient, and so forth, we are, reducing friction in the ability of organizations of any kind to get things done. The question then is, are they doing things that are bringing net value to society? And you can't isolate, I think the fiction, if value streams thinking is about systems thinking, right? That you can't just look at your one narrow silo of activity. You have to think about the whole flow of value and activity in that organization. Well, by the same token, we can't think of organizations just as commercial entities. They fit into the broader, spectrum of society and the ecosystem. And we need to be considering all of those externalities and making sure that we're optimizing the right organizations that are doing the right things. To take Drucker's point, right? There's nothing more wasteful than optimizing a process that shouldn't be done, right? Or
I mean, that kind of brings me to thinking about John Smart's talk this year at DevOps Enterprise Summit. He was talking about kind of the industrial revolution and what has brought us to where we are with digital transformation,
right,
and the present day efforts. But the difference between the last time I heard him speak in 2019 and this year is 2019. He was talking about outcomes. He's talking about the downstream effects of efforts. And this year, the major theme was incentives, the upstream. What is the thing that kind of pulls outcomes into a specific direction, or creates the conditions for different outcomes? And I found that very valuable. I think it's very rewarding to see the narrative directed towards the larger system, the larger impacts on the system, the upstream of the things that we commonly focus on downstream, right? A lot of people, I mean, we're kind of dragging the industry through the dark ages of looking at just output to outcomes, and now to be looking beyond outcomes to incentives. Like, what is actually going to make things happen? What is the driving force for the outcomes that we will see emerging from a given system? That was very encouraging to see. And I hope people notice that and kind of take that to heart, because I think it's a very powerful thing, especially with a lot of folks talking about OKRs and, objectives, but very little conversation currently about incentives. And there's a lot of challenge when you have one side of that conversation and not the other.
And I've heard John Smart talk in a couple of other contexts recently. IT Revolution's been bringing him and the other authors of Better Values, Sooner, Safer, Happier, to do kind of a book club, so to speak. But he's using incentives as a mantra. And it feels like he's had some real breakthrough in his own thinking that, I mean, he said in the talk that he gave at DOS that everything can be boiled down to incentives. To take the language that you and I have used, it's value. Like, what is the value that different people receive? And of course, everybody's, as we often say, the value of all of the participants in a value stream is all different. The value of customers, every person experiences value differently, which is another way of saying the incentives are a little bit different. But this, as you point out, the structuring of the incentives drives behavior. Again, in the spirit of, I guess, lingering on John Smart's talk, one really striking thing is he said for 3 million years, humans and our near ancestors have moved together in small bands. And these small bands or small tribes were naturally cross-functional, interdisciplinary teams, with tight communication, and our brains have evolved for that. And he walked through some of the history of industrialization. Had a nice photo of him doing a site visit at the first mill somewhere in I forget where it was, Cheltenham or Chatham or someplace in England, but saying that this is the first place where you really had specialization of labor, and people doing just one industrialization of labor, where you optimize for individual people doing just one piece of things and trying to build up the whole system. And obviously industrialization has been very, very effective in accomplishing lots of change in this world, for better or for worse. And we see the pendulum swinging back towards operating in teams that align with the evolutionary apparatus of our brains. That small group interactions are what we're really primed for. And so I think him giving that context was very, very powerful. And lingering for a couple of minutes on a couple of other insights that I had. One was a book that just came out, The Value Flywheel Effect. Had a good opportunity to spend some time with David Anderson, the author. Steve and I had dinner with him and a number of others. And it came out, some of their same conclusions were conclusions that Steve and I had come to together, which is that it's all about the conversation, and that the value flywheel effect centers a lot on Wardley mapping, and using Wardley mapping as a way to understand the value chains involved in building systems, but that the conversation is more important than the map that you come up with at the end. As you and I say, the mapping is more important than the map, and that these things are tools to facilitate conversation, knowing that everybody's understanding of a situation is volatile, right? And spending the time together to sort of entrain to each other's understandings of a situation is what's really most powerful.
Yeah, that was a really it's surprising to see the depth that he goes into with different examples and fairly complex or complicated examples around value streams driving specific conversations. Wardley maps driving specific conversations, but in the context of kind of driving architectural decisions, which I guess brings up a couple of other talk ideas. But if we touch on the architecture piece for a moment, there was a talk by Randy Shoup talking about architecture and value, and that's probably a good place for us to spend a moment on as well. The one thing that I took away from his talk I liked was that he spent time talking about the effects of architecture on cognitive load, and how you can have an effective architecture facilitating cognitive load and ineffective. And really, that brings us back to this idea of small teams kind of owning a manageable domain and able to kind of operate autonomously and with minimal dependencies. And that's something that I think we heard several times over the conference. But that was my main takeaway from his talk.
he gave a second talk, totally different title, different content, but very, very similar idea, right? This simplicity, the importance of simple components, simple interactions, and so forth. And the basically factoring in that human element in the design of these systems, designing for manageable cognitive complexity. And that's, I think, been the thing that's been so impactful for me about DevOps Enterprise Summit is all of these different aspects of the human domain. So many talks emphasizing the importance of empathy, um, leading by love, and these kinds of things. The importance of training leaders in the technical domain, bringing up future generations of technical leaders, and the kinds of human skills required to be effective with that. Another talk that I made an impact on me was a talk from PNC Bank about their journey towards automating compliance, and that was one of the that a lot of their experiences seeded this new book from IT Revolution, Investments Unlimited. What I really most noted from the talk was all of the setbacks they had and their persistence despite developers really not wanting to get on board with automating compliance. The compliance officers didn't want to get on board with automating compliance. Nobody wanted to get on board, and they had all these assumptions. And I think they did a really good job in their talk of highlighting all of their assumptions going in and how wrong they or how they needed to change their point of view or evolve their point of view.
That's one thing that I really like about DevOps Enterprise Summit, and it's kind of it's I think it's Gene and Jeff and the organizing committee really kind of emphasizing, highlighting the challenges and the learning and the mistakes that were made.
Hmm.
Is something rare in the conference space, and I really enjoy that. One thing that I do want to touch on one other thing, but before we kind of wrap up, you had a talk. Tell us a little bit about your talk and what was the main message?
Yeah, I gave a lightning talk. So it's a fun 5-minute format where there's basically a big buzzer and a big hook that pulls you off stage after 5 minutes. And the title of the talk was "Forget AI. What the world needs most is NI." And obviously a bit of clickbait and teaser, but NI stands for natural intelligence. It's a term that was coined by the artificial intelligence community to describe the intelligence of humans, animals, and the intelligence that's evolved from nature. And my thesis was that while there's a ton of buzz around AI, our ability to determine whether AI has beneficial effects or harmful effects will be based on how well we use our own human NI, natural intelligence. And I guess I had a couple of points, a couple of main themes. One was the things that hack our human or attack or undermine our human natural intelligence are very different from the things that hack or undermine IT systems, but we need to be very, very aware of those threats. We're easily distracted by shiny objects, pretty things, craving, and I flashed up a picture of Las Vegas to embody craving, and we're strongly influenced by fear as well, massive influential factor in our mind, and then ignorance. Some of the ways that we understand our world are problematic, like the ways that we conceptualize things, and we mistake our concepts for reality, and creates the possibility of factionalizing and so forth. And yeah, talked about ways of caring for the mind through simplicity, stillness, or calming the mind, and then reflection and gaining insight. So it was great fun to have a chance to share that, and I appreciated getting good feedback on the talk.
I think one of the things that was really fun about your talk was immediately after when we had that conversation with Steve Spear,
Right.
and he was just so happy to um, encounter the subject material that you were covering, because he was like, you basically gave my talk that I'm presenting tomorrow, because his message in his talk was all about this idea of simplification. And at the time, we didn't really know what he was going to be speaking about, but we do know that Gene and Stephen Spear have been talking about this idea of kind of like structure and dynamics. But the message that they kind of presented was more about simplification, and I think like organizing work and thinking about the big picture of work, and how to break it down effectively. And it was kind of a unique talk. What was your takeaway from it? Was kind of this talk wrapping up the conference as well.
Yeah, I mean, the it was literally 30 minutes after I gave that talk that we were talking. We had a chance to find a group of people talking with Steve Spear, and what that interaction with Steve Spear, and he was complimentary to the talk that I'd given. But what that interaction with Steve Spear highlighted in my mind was how incredibly humble he is, and what a good listener he is,
Mm-hmm.
and how thoughtful, and he's always just absorbing and thinking deeply, and he's so unassuming in his physical presence, and gracious and kind. So it was a lovely interaction. Gene and Steve gave a talk starting with the thesis of how do you move a couch, and the level of human coordination that's required just to move a couch. And if you have to go and get permission from your boss, like, oh, because this thing is pinching my finger, that's a whole lot less efficient than being able to communicate directly with the person who's carrying the other end of the couch. And, very funny story about scaling that up to like painting an entire building or apartment complex and moving furniture, rearranging furniture around an entire apartment complex, and the coordination challenges. But you mentioned simplicity. Like I had said that there's these three environments, the three activities that are most conducive for the health of our natural intelligence: simplification, stillness, and reflection. But he really actually lingered on the stillness aspect, and that came out in his talk, that he and Gene, in addition to talking about structure and dynamics, they've got 4 S's, which I'm struggling to remember. I'll put a link in the show notes to that. But one of them is simplification, standardization, synchronization, and one other. But so some of those are structural changes that you can make. But the thesis, or the core message that they came away from, is you can't do your best thinking in the heat of the moment. And Steve lingered on this idea of thinking fast and slow, or system 1 thinking, the fast, instinctive, reflexive thinking, versus system 2 thinking, which is the more thoughtful, analytic thinking. That is, did I get that backwards, or is that right? Anyway, system 1 and system 2. But
system 2 is your lingering.
Yeah, the contemplative, the logical, the actual processing. And he said that you need to be creating opportunities to be still and to reflect on the challenges that are being faced at present, or in the past, or especially in the future, anticipating what are the challenges that can arise. And if you as a leader, or you as an organization, are not creating that space for stillness and reflection, you're not going to be able to find the best ideas that you need in the heat of the moment. Because when you're operating in a fast-paced environment, you're using system 1 thinking. It's just boom, 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 fast thinking. And that's important. That's why we've got, well, that's perhaps, you could argue evolutionarily, perhaps that's why we have these 2 modes of thinking, one for just fast movement, not necessarily going to guarantee the best responses, but it will guarantee a fast response. And then the system 2, to think about what is actually the best response, and then needing to give time to both of those. So yeah, great.
Yeah, I like that. I like that highlight the idea, and it resonates with me because I hear often with folks that how do we make the time to do any of this stuff?
Right,
How do we make the time to improve? How do we make the time to step away and look at
right,
what we're doing and how it all fits together? And it's just like you have to make the time. You really
right,
have to. And often when you take the time, you make time, right? I mean, you discover things that can save you time, but also it's a Parkinson's law thing. It's like you if you carve out time, you'll things will fit in. You make space for things by carving. Um, so I thought that's a very valuable message to repeat. But speaking of valuable
I,
messages, oh, go ahead.
just last point, I'll chime in there. I mean, I mentioned things that hack our natural intelligence. The first one is craving. And I think there is a certain addiction to busyness, like feeling
Mm-hmm.
like um, we have to be doing stuff all the time. And that may have arisen in part for good reasons, but it's something that needs to be seriously watched and moderated. The other day, you and I were in the Flow Collective group talking about impossible backlogs, and that seems to be a universal theme of anybody who's got a backlog. It quickly becomes impossible.
Mm,
Why is that? Because our appetites, our eyes are bigger than our stomach, right? Our appetites are infinite, and it takes zero energy to have a wish or a plan or a promise to do something. And it takes a whole lot of time and energy to actually carry it out. So there's this asymmetry between the greed for all the things we could do, right,
mm,
versus what we actually have capacity for. A very simple, obvious example is I would love to live in Switzerland. It's a really beautiful, amazing country. I'd also love to live in Portugal and in Korea
mm,
and, you name it, like a long list of countries.
mm.
I get to live in one country at any
Right.
given time. Like, and you can alternate a little bit, but basically, there's a trade-off. There's an opportunity
Yeah.
cost, and that's fine.
Yeah. And that,
And we need that contentment, right? Otherwise, we're just consuming our life with busyness and debt of
mhm.
one form or another.
Yeah, that idea of saying yes to something means you're saying no to everything else,
Right.
being very, very powerful. Um, so to wrap us up, I do want to kind of summarize into a couple things. So one thing that I want to highlight as a takeaway is this idea of not being attached to specific language, speaking to
Mhm.
whoever you're speaking to in a language that they understand, and that can mean giving up your buzzword or leaving it on the sidelines. This, I think, the power of incentives is incredibly relevant in getting us beyond output and outcomes to thinking about systems and the power of systems and the pull of systems. And then the last one, I guess, that I really enjoyed is just the need for simplification, the need to constantly be stepping away and looking at how can we think about this in its most let's say digestible um, context for the purposes of understanding it in a broader context, also for the purposes of communication and having better conversations.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.